Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another video. And today I want to talk about why the Åland Islands are strategically important for Sweden. And the reason I chose this subject in particular was because I've been reading a lot about about these islands, or the Åland Islands, in the news lately, how they're building up their defenses there and how it's becoming very crucial and important for Sweden. So, when you think of one of the most strategic places in Europe, you might, probably imagine the English Channel or the Bosporus or the Gibraltar. But, what if I told you that one of the most important and crucial spots is a tiny group of islands in the Baltic Sea, the so-called Åland Islands, So, and for a long time I didn't really think of that for quite some time, because it never really crossed my mind and I never had this interest. And only now, in the last couple of months or even a year, I would say, this kind of became a topic for me personally. And so today we're just going to explore why these islands are very important for Sweden, and both historically and right now, and just in the middle of this tense geopolitical climate, so to speak. And so I guess I'll start off with the geography. So, the Åland Islands, they're basically placed kind of at the entrance of the Gulf of Bothnia. It's a long stretch of sea between Sweden and Finland. And, it's not just a random archipelago, it's essentially a choke point or chokehold point. So basically, any naval movement in or out of the Gulf has to pass by the Ålands. And, I think it's about 160 kilometers away from Stockholm, if I remember. So, essentially, in military terms, that's basically kind of a stone's throw away. So if, for example, let's say Russia does manage to occupy the Åland Islands, Stockholm is just 160 kilometers away, and that will give Russia a pretty huge advantage. And, whoever controls the Åland Islands has the power to protect or threaten Sweden's very heartland, basically. So the second point I want to talk about here is the historical background. It's a very hotly contested archipelago, essentially. Åland's strategic position has been recognized for many centuries, and in the 18th and 19th centuries, Sweden and Russia fought bitterly over control of the islands. And in 1809, after the Finnish War, Sweden lost Finland, including Åland, to the Russian Empire. And Russia soon realized the island's strategic value and began fortifying them, turning Åland into a potential launching pad towards Stockholm. And so this didn't just alarm Sweden, but also Britain and France, who saw Russian expansion in the Baltic as a major threat. So during the Crimean War in the 1850s, Britain and France attacked Russian fortifications on Åland and demolishing the main fortress of Bomarsund. And after the war, the Treaty of Paris in 1856 declared Åland permanently demilitarized, as it's basically a status that still holds today. And in 1921, the League of Nations decision, when we fast forward to after World War I, the question of Åland resurfaced again, and the local population, who were and still are overwhelmingly Swedish-speaking, wanted to reunite with Sweden. But the newly independent Finland claimed sovereignty over Åland. So to prevent conflict, the League of Nations in 1921 made a historic decision, which is that Åland would remain part of Finland, but it would keep its autonomy, its Swedish language, and most importantly, its demilitarized status. So essentially, this compromise assured peace, but it also left Åland in a kind of a strategic limbo. So then when we move forward to World War II, Åland's neutrality was tested again during World War II. Both the Soviet Union and the Nazi Germany understood its strategic value. In 1939, the Soviet Union pressured Finland to allow military bases on Åland, which Finland resisted. And during the Winter War and Continuation War, Åland was heavily mined and fortified temporarily by Finland with Swedish cooperation to prevent Soviet occupation, excuse me. And once again, Åland's location made it a prize everyone wanted to control, but nobody wanted to openly fight over. So now let's kind of get into today's geopolitical context. And, after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, the entire security situation in Northern Europe changed, and Sweden, which had stayed outside of NATO for decades, finally joined them in 2024. And for Sweden and NATO, the Åland Islands are more important than ever. If Russia were to occupy them, even covertly, it could control naval access to the northern Baltic and threaten Stockholm almost immediately. And this makes Åland a potential flashpoint in any NATO-Russia confrontation. And when we talk about the economic and hybrid threats, it's not just about armies and navies, essentially. Sweden's economy relies heavily on Baltic shipping. Oil, gas, and goods flow through these waters every day. Control of Åland means control of those trade routes. And because Åland is demilitarized, it's uniquely vulnerable to modern forms of conflict. So first one is the hybrid warfare, like disinformation campaigns aimed at its Swedish-speaking population, cyber attacks on critical infrastructure, or even the sudden arrival of so-called little green men, covert forces that could seize control before anyone could respond, something what essentially happened in Crimea 2014, those little green men who appeared and nobody knew who they were, but we kind of all knew who they were and most definitely knew. And so that could definitely happen. And I think it's also important to mention the cultural and the political connections. So, let's not forget about the cultural factor. Over 90% of Åland's 30,000 residents speak Swedish as their mother tongue. And for many Swedes, it's not just strategically important, but it's also culturally close. And it's part of a shared heritage. That's why Sweden has always felt a special responsibility for the island's future, even though they belong to Finland politically, which is something that I find very interesting. That for a long time I really assumed that it was Sweden, that it was owned by Sweden and controlled politically and economically and strategically. Well, strategically of course, but I meant more politically here. But you learn something new every day essentially. And so I think that's kind of the little historical sequence segment on the Åland Islands. I figured it would be pretty interesting for many of you. Considering that my audience is largely Swedish based, I assume you guys know most of that already, if not everything already. I think this is more directed towards people who are outside of Sweden and who are not really connected to Sweden or any of that, or just wish to learn some history. So let me know what your thoughts are in the comments, and if you enjoyed this deep dive into geopolitics, don't forget to share and subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more videos like this one. And I hope you have a good day, and see you next time.